As I've set out to write my own criticisms of the Star Wars sequel films produced under Disney, see those 3 previous videos for more, especially the initial video, Rey Skywalker is poorly written and here's why, which kicked off my attempts to do so, I've been avoiding retreading old ground as much as possible. I've talked extensively before about the process of how a sort of anti-fandom evolved out of the public response to The Last Jedi, and where the arguments about the film were revealing to me. So just doing that again would feel bad. I didn't think it would be as provocative as trying to say something new. It is, on the whole, trivially easy to debunk a lot of the bad film criticism on YouTube, even for someone who isn't educated in film as a medium, even if it isn't necessarily as easy to, get people who have been sold a series of elaborate lies via social media to admit that they've been duped. The more energy I spend, to borrow a Milo Rossi term, Google debunking, the more I gained the sneaking suspicion that people are, by and large, less being misled by bad critics, and more willfully exercising their own ability to engage in bad faith behavior, and being enabled by bad critics. This is a different sort of problem, because while it can be challenging to convince someone they've been lied to, it's next to impossible to convince them if they're okay with that fact because they're getting something out of it. I have a video about this that I'm working on, but in about 8 years of doing YouTube on and off again, I've come to realize that social media algorithms mainly incentivize people to click on things they would have already wanted to click on, which means the majority of the people your content reaches either agree with you or will be invested in disagreeing with you. While opportunities for productive conversation may be few and far between, there is still hope. I've gotten a lot of varied feedback on my videos as I've set out with renewed ambition this year to talk about Star Wars in a more productive manner, and among those, the most intriguing to me are the ones that seem to convey some version of the sentiment that they hadn't been privy to the information I was conveying beforehand, or hadn't thought about what I had said before. This is a curious feeling to me because I'm very self-conscious of not being educated as a film critic. There's so much about the medium of film that I don't know, and so my insight into film criticism is pretty frequently limited to what I do already know about writing and storytelling. Having people tell me that they hadn't heard or thought of something that I said about a film is, therefore, a new feeling to me. I bring this up because I think it's conspicuous that Star Wars as a series with such broad appeal would lack for alternative interpretations. Actively trying to say something that hasn't been said about these films, even the more recent ones, should be challenging. I think I came pretty close to doing that with the Rey video, but in that video I still leaned pretty hard on some essayists who I thought had made better videos. I think I was about as harsh in that video as I could justify being, but despite that, when in later videos I said things that were more sympathetic to the people who worked on these Disney Star Wars films and what they were trying to do, people still showed up to accuse me of shilling or talk down to me. I guess that's the consequence of holding a minority opinion about something, but it still feels kind of shitty. Not the least because I felt I was pretty explicit that my feelings about those films were that they weren't all they could have been. That might seem like a trivial criticism, and it would be if we were talking about any other film, but this is Star Wars. It's supposed to be really out there and meaningful. If it isn't, people will feel let down. And while maybe some people will actively try to purvey that feeling nowadays, that doesn't change what the filmmaker's aims should be. I think accusing people of shilling or grifting just because they disagree with you, whether ideologically or just about a work of art, is pretty telling and childish. I try to only call people grifters when I think I can demonstrate that they're actively lying about something in order to guide people into a financially motivated scheme where they can then be taken advantage of. It's not just about making AdSense off of a disagreement that matters, but also specifically the act of purposefully misleading people to that end. Oftentimes, this is an ideologically motivated act because the ideology keeps people coming back and even needing more. But without the lying, you're just talking about a club, or a political party, or a point of view. Not everybody I disagree with about a film, or book, or video game is a grifter, and frankly, shill inherently implies another level of behavior entirely. Shilling is a phrase for someone who plays the part of a member of the crowd in a con, where the dealer uses them to imply the game isn't rigged or to make the con otherwise attractive. If you are being paid by a third party to advocate on behalf of their point of view, and then hiding that fact while also lying to take people's money, then maybe shilling would be an applicable term. But YouTube's terms of service require the disclosure of sponsorships and the like, so when you call people on this platform shills, you're potentially accusing them of a bannable offense. That's one reason I don't usually go there. You can probably guess where this is going. While I tolerate a lot of disagreement and even welcome it or literally ask for it in many cases, I don't necessarily think all quote-unquote disagreement is created equal. Usually I just let things play out, but if someone crosses a line in my comment section like, I don't know, spamming, calling people slurs, engaging in unrelated proselytizing, got a couple of those recently, self-promotion, or just generally anything that borders on harassment, YouTube gives us the tools to curate that comment section. But what happens when misinformation is endemic? What happens when people are simply not being told the whole truth about things? You can watch a film for yourself and decide whether you think it's good. I like the Star Wars prequels, and I don't care generally if people think I shouldn't. But there's a lot of rumors about the production of the Star Wars sequels that have circulated, especially among the more toxic elements of the fandom, which we'll get to closer towards the end of this video. We'll be addressing 3 pieces of misinformation about the Disney Star Wars sequels today, starting with the smallest and least consequential, and working our way towards the big one, the one I can't believe it took me this long to talk about. Before we begin, a word of warning. Nothing about this video is meant to suggest that these films are above criticism, are as good as Lucas's original work, or are even any good at all. You don't have to think a film is good to understand why misinformation about the people who worked on it is bad, in my opinion. The thing about toxic fandom, or in this case, a sort of anti-fandom that has built its identity not so much around being positively invested in Star Wars and its ideas, but largely negatively invested in Star Wars and the people behind it, is that this leads people to care about the wrong sort of stuff. At least that's how I see it. In the spirit of that, I'd like to start with this rather rude comment I got on a previous video, which I've censored a little bit to focus in on the only relevant paragraph, as I don't think the rest of it really bears responding to, and am not interested in this person as an individual. Again, we're here to focus primarily on the misinformation, and here we have 2 key pieces of it. The first thing of note is this idea of whether the sequel films were planned at all. This is a tricky subject because it touches on aspects of the making of these films that won't necessarily have been public knowledge beyond what's been documented in behind-the-scenes footage and what has been acknowledged publicly by the people who worked on them. And oftentimes that information then gets twisted and presented poorly, which is why I wanted to pull from a couple different sources here. In that video about Rey that I mentioned earlier, I make reference to some helpful videos by other YouTubers, and one of them is the Empire Wreckers video about the making of The Rise of Skywalker. I said in a previous video that very little about the Star Wars sequels feels planned, so I understand where people are coming from when they relay that feeling, but it is just a feeling, and I think this video captures that quite well.
The IPDG was keen about the idea of heroes being able to come from anywhere. I've heard complaints that the sequel trilogy suffered from a lack of planning ahead, that having no outline for the series beyond these vague ideas is partially responsible for the uneven level of quality across the trilogy, but I have to disagree. If anyone was going to be responsible for doing that planning, it would be the IPDG, which is made up of executives who, for the most part, aren't writers, which is exactly the type of design-by-committee approach that makes bland, interchangeable movies. And speaking of Marvel, the MCU didn't have an outline either. Just saying that a purple guy wants the Chaos Emeralds is not actually a story outline, and the series is full of retcons and unresolved foreshadowing because they let each movie be its own thing with, at most, a checklist of which MacGuffins they need to use and a consistent tone and visual style.
I think it's important to not get too caught up in attributing what we feel about a film to the intent of the filmmakers or the process behind the film's creation, and the Empire Wreckers video nails that. I'll link it in the description again for those who want the full context. Sources, as always, are linked in the bibliography, but there are other reasons to think this as well. I talk a little bit about the way Rian Johnson developed the characters of Luke and Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, as well as the overall plotline of that film in my video The Last Jedi Did Not Go Far Enough, so I'll let those points stand. But importantly, several figures affiliated with the films have talked about the planning of these films, including Johnson himself, when interviewed by Alan Sepinwall for Rolling Stone earlier this year in The Big 2025, where he said, "With Last Jedi, there was a popular conception that you and J.J. Abrams didn't really talk, which is why certain ideas get undone from one movie to the next. What was your actual level of communication with him?" "We communicated. We met and I spent days with him and was able to get into his head and all the choices he had made. That having been said, I communicated and I went away and made the movie, and he was in the middle of Force Awakens. Ultimately, I feel like the choices in it, none of them were born out of an intent to undo anything. They were all born out of the opposite intent of, how do I take this story that JJ wrote, that I really loved, and these characters that he created that I really loved, and take them to the next step. Kathy said, we're looking at someone to do the Empire Strikes Back of this series, and I took that assignment very seriously. Maybe more seriously than someone would have liked. I guess to me, that didn't mean making something that just nods to Empire, that meant trying to genuinely do what Empire did. It seems like the reason I talked about the problem with The Last Jedi, as I see it, being that it's too much of a rehash of The Empire Strikes Back, and ironically not that it wasn't planned, went over one or two people's heads. I hope that the record shows that what I was saying wasn't totally baseless. Johnson talks a ton about building on what came before, and this isn't even strictly contained to how he treats Lucas's work either. It's also present in how he talks about working with J.J. Abrams quite clearly. This sort of gets us into the next point, if you could call it that, made in that comment about the idea of Rian Johnson as this hugely egotistical figure who sort of instituted his version of Star Wars in defiance of everything that came before, which doesn't really feel true to me. There's this great Jack Howard interview with Rian Johnson from back in 2017 that I think, like so much else, really gives us this impression that is quite consistent with everything I've seen of Rian Johnson as a pretty normal, down-to-earth creative.
How does that work with like such a huge, like I imagine when you're making something like Brick, like that, it's like an independent movie, you do that in your own way, but with something like this, which is such a huge studio movie, maybe the huge studio movie, like how do you like go, this is what I got, like, and it's like there's like notebooks.
It's all the same stuff.
Amazing.
Man. It's all the same thing. It's words on the page, words for actors to say. It's a story that you got to follow and you got to care about. The truth is that's been the big, because I had the same feeling coming into it that you just described. I was like, I've never done a studio movie ever. This is my first studio movie, and definitely nothing like this scale. What's going to feel different about it? And the big pleasant surprise for me was how it really is the same process as any other movie. You know, you're just telling a story with some actors, trying to make people care about it.
Yeah.
And other than that, I mean, all the stuff that's bigger, it's a bigger production, but it doesn't really affect like what matters about the process, oddly. Definitely not the writing. The writing is a great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you're writing fade in space or fade in, school.
Yeah.
It's you're still then you have that log line, and then you have to make a scene work.
There'll be another link in the description for that video because I think it's such a great exchange, and is really the type of thing I like to see the most. When you get successful as an artist, the thing that is the most important to me, other than focusing on your craft, is lifting other people up. It's great to see a successful director talk to a younger filmmaker about this exact sort of stuff. It's very difficult to succeed as a creative, and I think it showcases, at minimum, a kind of grounded persona for Johnson to want to talk on that level about the process when he's promoting his own work, to take the time out to field questions that maybe a more arrogant person would see as irrelevant to advertising a new film. But it's not irrelevant, is it? It's very relevant to think of the creative process as this human thing that connects people. And I like when that's the tact that creatives take. Returning to that Rolling Stone interview from earlier, I think we can see another bit of self-awareness from Johnson. Speaking of which, Last Jedi was a big hit. It was critically acclaimed at the time. But because there is some subset of some unknown size that is really, really mad online about it, that then becomes the dominant narrative about the movie. What do you remember as that backlash was happening? How did that feel for you to be witnessing it? In the moment, it's a complicated chain of reactions to it. It never feels good to have anybody coming after you on the internet, and especially coming after you saying things that I think I very much do not agree with about a thing I made and put a lot of heart and soul into. But at the same time, having grown up a Star Wars fan ultimately let me contextualize it and feel at peace with it in many different ways. Just remembering going back on one level to arguing on the playground about Star Wars as a kid. And I was in college when the prequels came out. My friends and I were prequel hate central. Everyone was ruthless at the time. And of course, now the prequels are embraced. I'm not saying that as a facile, oh, things will flip around in 20 years, you'll see. It's more that this push and pull, and this hatred to stuff that seems new, this is all a part of being a Star Wars fan. Culture war garbage aside, I think that essential part of it is a healthy part. One thing that I do think comes across, and in a very unfortunate way at that, in my opinion, when it comes to the creation of the Disney Star Wars sequel films, is the near total abandonment of the prequel films. I really have to say that I don't like the idea of prequel haters being put in charge of the future of the films, because when you get right down to it, the prequels were half, literally half, of George Lucas's vision, and I think some degree of upholding that vision should be central to this franchise. The fact that those films haven't really been given their flowers, in terms of being used as central pillars of Disney's new canon, is one of my larger issues with what we've been given. It bleeds into how I feel about a lot of stuff, especially since so much of Star Wars now is focused on the timeline either before A New Hope or after Return of the Jedi. Seeing more stuff set prior to The Phantom Menace or beyond The Rise of Skywalker is on my Star Wars wish list, but sadly, it seems hard to know at present where we stand in regards to the prospect of getting new Star Wars material, and I don't want something that will feel forced, in the sense of being content for content's sake, or poorly thought out. Thankfully, I think we can at least see a kind of egalitarian approach here from Johnson, where he isn't lashing out at people who didn't like his film, as much as he rightfully pushes back on some of the more manufactured quote-unquote culture war outrage, which is less about the film itself and more about political agendas being Trojan horsed into cultural commentary for clicks and views. I really hate the idea of people trying to use culture as a weapon to change our political environment. I much prefer the idea that philosophy, even where it's explicitly political, would contextualize our approach to the arts. That feels to me much fairer and more useful, especially because it's more educational and not a cowardly attempt to slow walk people into political positions they might not have held otherwise by using veiled language to disguise otherwise unappealing ideas and sentiments. Speaking of, we're finally at that part of the video, so without any further prevarication, I give you all the only person I will be responding to by name in this video. Star Wars Theory. A lot of people have responded to this guy given some of his nonsensical takes on things like Andor, where a lot of his criticism felt very forced and ludicrous. But because Mark Hamill gave another interview this year, naturally, in the following days, Star Wars Theory pounced on a chance to ride some coattails.
Rian Johnson is one of the most gifted directors I've ever worked with. He's amiable, he's fun on set, he's smart. He made a great movie. I think the staging of the standoff between Kylo Ren, Adam Driver, and I at the end is so well staged. You know, the foreshadowing that I'm not really there. Adam wipes the snow away and you see the red planet beneath. I wipe the snow and it's just snow. I mean, that's so subtle. I love Knives Out and Brick and Looper. He's one of my favorite directors.
He's glazing so that he can kind of, I know he's going to say something opposite, or maybe he feels bad about all of the clips that have gone around of him that have gone viral where he's explaining how it's just a movie, that it's not his Luke Skywalker, it's Jake Skywalker, how he fundamentally disagrees with everything Ryan did. I wish Mark would just be so, less Hollywood about this and just more candid about, look, let's be real. If we're trying to respect George and his character, screw all this bullshit.
It is the name of your true self you've only forgotten. I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
Just say it what it is. Just say it for what it is. He destroyed the character. Stand by your convictions and stop glazing. Just say it how it is. And I hope he's going to do that because we'll see.
We'll come back to this in a minute, but I wanted to take stock here of how Star Wars Theory just subtly adds in that Mark supposedly disagrees with everything Ryan did. That's not how it sounds to me, bud. It sounds like Mark Hamill had an impression of the character of Luke, and Rian Johnson had a different idea for how to develop that character in the film, and Hamill ended up having a blast playing the character the same way he often does, despite their initially different perspectives. It's perfectly possible for two creatives on one project to initially disagree, while both endorsing the project. You see this a lot with the anti-fandom that has grown around Star Wars over the years. Guys like Star Wars Theory like to claim that Mark Hamill sees things their way, so of course when it turns out that things are more complicated than that, they have to trot out the raw copium that Hamill is just being nice or just trying to go along to get along, or worse, doing it for the money and opportunities in Hollywood, which, if you think about it, is a really nasty thing to say about someone you supposedly have all this respect for. That's just poor form. However, one thing I do want to thank Star Wars Theory for is bringing up those other clips of Mark Hamill, because this is the final piece of misinformation that we're going to focus on. Does Mark Hamill hate The Last Jedi and think Rian Johnson's version of Luke Skywalker is really that bad? Let's check out some clips that most people don't tend to show.
One thing in the documentary that kept coming back up was you saying that you fundamentally disagreed with Rian Johnson's. I know.
I wish they hadn't done that. I'll tell you why. Because that should remain in the rehearsal process. Mm-hmm. That should be between the screenwriter and the director. And I regret saying that out loud. And I said it before I saw the whole movie put together. And it prejudices people in a way that's unfair, because people that are unhappy with the movie, will cite that and say, see Hamill hated it too. Yeah. And look, I mean, it was unexpected, because Luke was always so optimistic and positive, but it's got to move on. I mean, I do like the unexpected, and that was certainly unexpected. And even though it's hard, when you're pushed out of your comfort zone, that's probably a good sign, because otherwise it would be, something that everyone had expected, and that's not good. Last Jedi was incredibly daring, I mean, because I remember one thing that was very informative to me, because I would say, like, but we really have to think of what the audience expects and what they want. And he says, no, we have to do the opposite. We have to give them something they don't expect that we want.
I'm just saying that it really felt like a conclusion. My character was given complete closure. I died, ironically, by overdosing on the Force, I might point out. But, that seemed to be, and once the Skywalker trilogy was over, it was a whole new era for them. George gave them this amazing canvas, the entire galaxy. They can do westerns, mysteries, comedies, whodunits, anything within that realm of the Star Wars. And they're doing so well. I love Rogue One, Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett. I just think it's time. I had my time. I'm really appreciative, but I'm really looking to the future for all these new projects.
There's this old phrase, you used to hear it more often, Christian nationalists still use it sometimes, called lying for the Lord. The idea is that in order to evangelize the good word, sometimes a falsehood needs to be spoken in service of a greater truth. We call this bad faith in other contexts, where someone is saying something that they don't really hold to be true, in the same way that you would hold it to be true that the sky is blue or that you're hearing my voice right now. It's not reality per se, it's more like a thing they'll comfortably treat like reality when it's convenient for them in the pursuit of what they actually want. In the process of presenting his own video as a truth bomb from Mark Hamill, the audience will note that the video's title is I'm Disgusted. Mark Hamill finally opens up about The Last Jedi Luke Skywalker at time of writing. While also implying directly that Mark Hamill is hiding his power level, Star Wars Theory is basically accusing Mark Hamill of lying for the Lord, where the Lord is, George Lucas, I suppose, Star Wars generally, the real fans. He's saying Mark Hamill is acting in bad faith, although I'm not sure Star Wars Theory would understand what that really means. It implies, for one thing, that Star Wars Theory thinks Mark Hamill is dishonest, which is ironic given that he waxes poetic in this video about how so many YouTubers are fake. Brother, you're literally presenting your own video as you agreeing with someone you just implied was fake. Again, this is not a thing you would say about someone for whom you hold genuine respect. Star Wars Theory has, in short order, implied that Mark Hamill is fake, bad faith, and cares about money more than being honest. I think that's wretched, and a terrible way to talk about Mark. It's not just dishonest, it's disrespectful of the very person whose coattails you're desperately riding for the sake of clicks and views. Oh, and YouTube AdSense dollars, I suppose, as well as plugs for your own merchandise, which is how this video opens. This man is my hero, which is why he's a liar who only cares about money. Buy my lightsabers. Man, that's so wrong.
And the only thing unfortunate about that is I've heard comments from fans who think that I somehow dislike Rian Johnson. And
I don't think anybody thinks you dislike Rian Johnson, Mark. I think people want to just see you be real. I think people and fans, the fans that wait in line to pay for your autograph for $1,000, to pay for your photo ops, to see you because your character has inspired so many people in this world over all these decades. No one thinks you care about Rian Johnson. I don't think people even give a shit about Rian Johnson and his hundreds of millions of dollars that he's gotten from his new projects, which great for him. He's doing his job and he's succeeding. But he failed with Star Wars. He failed Star Wars fans. And he divided the fandom even more. And holding up that little cue card, your Snoke theory sucks. The Snoke theory from a freaking 12-year-old was better than the shit that he gave us with his $1 million contract. Let that shit sink in. None of these guys that were hired by Kathleen Kennedy, who appointed all of them. You want to know how Rian Johnson got the job of The Last Jedi? He came in to pitch Kathleen a Star Wars trilogy of his own, which is what they were going to do. Remember how they were announcing it and then it's been shelved? That was the original idea. And she said, you know what? We don't have a director for The Last Jedi for the middle of this new trilogy. Why don't you do it, Ryan? And he's like, okay. That's how he got the job. No collaboration with JJ. No talks, no scripts, nothing. Just, hey, you want it? All right, cool.
It's always a good sign when, after someone brings up a person and appears to imply people have a problem with them, you spin out on a rant about how you don't have a problem with them, which then, inside of a single minute, devolves into a full-blown rant of you litigating hyper-specific instances of them slighting a group of which you are a part. I'm not mad at Rian Johnson, which I will now demonstrate with my list of Rian Johnson-related grievances. I don't think that's making the point you think it's making, man. That's not normal. Having a pre-built list of things you think are wrong with someone and all the stuff they did, and being heavily emotionally invested in it while insisting you don't have a problem with someone, I think there's a line in Hamlet for this. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. Queen Gertrude says that about a play, but I think it's pretty accurate here too. I guess we have to address that weird stuff he said, right? Hey guys, editing chariot here, so you know it's good. I realized when I was editing this video together that I did not double check his claim about the Snoke theory sucks thing, so on a whim I just went and googled about this, and yeah, it turns out the Snoke theory sucks thing is like a big just like phony blown out of proportion piece of misinformation, just like a ton of the other stuff that Star Wars theory says. This was actually something that was given to Rian Johnson by a fan. It was not like him promoting something for Disney. It was not something that he made. There was an enthusiastic fan that made something, and he's in a picture where he's holding it. If you look at the full image, there's articles covering this. There's like a inverse article covering it, I think. I'll put that on screen. There's an image of the actual merch, and you can see that, and hopefully that will make it clear that yeah, the whole like Snoke theory sucks thing, that's just baloney, and I can't honestly believe how many pieces of the supposed lore about these Disney films are just misinfo. Like, I wasn't even expecting there to be more than 3 things for me to talk about in this video, but there's actually 5 now that I've counted. It's just crazy. We've talked about this mistaken notion that there was no collaboration between Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams. But let's get into this idea that Rian Johnson, according to Star Wars Theory, got the job directing The Last Jedi by getting a meeting with Kathleen Kennedy where he first pitched her his own trilogy, then was offered to direct The Last Jedi and the trilogy Disney was currently making. Because remember, Star Wars Theory says this like it was an avoidance of collaborating with J.J. Abrams, which implies Abrams is already on this project, but then was announced to be directing The Last Jedi before being given his own trilogy. Do we see how maybe those events don't exactly make for a coherent timeline? It would make much more sense for Rian Johnson to be offered this job by Kathleen Kennedy, only then to later pitch a more full independent trilogy that he would completely direct. And of course, you saw this coming. That appears to be exactly what happened. In a 2017 article for the New York Times, Dave Itzkoff interviewed Rian Johnson on the then upcoming film The Last Jedi. How did you learn you were being considered to write and direct a new Star Wars film? It was really out of the blue. I had a few general meetings with Kathy Kennedy when she took over Lucasfilm. I never thought I was actually in the running, because I assumed every director on the planet would want to be doing a Star Wars movie. And then it was sprung on me. It was like a bomb dropped. I suddenly realized, oh, this meeting is about this. I didn't try to hide the fact that I was freaking out, but I also said, can I think about it? Why the hesitation? After Looper, I had been approached with other franchise stuff and had gotten used to saying no. And I knew this would mean so much to me. The worst thing I can imagine is having a bad experience making a Star Wars movie. Do you think Miss Kennedy was surprised you didn't accept immediately? She was slightly confused, I think. The next few days I couldn't sleep. I thought I was going to do a pros and cons list, but the truth is, it was more a decision from the heart. There was no way I could not do this. I think that basically cinches it, right? It makes no sense that Rian Johnson would be hesitant to take a job directing a film in a franchise because of which franchise it was, if he had already been pitching his own trilogy in that franchise. I think Star Wars Theory might be perhaps misremembering something, like this Wired piece interviewing Rian Johnson by Angela Watercutter. But even there, Rian Johnson says, honestly, I've been the rigmarole, I think he means in the rigmarole here, maybe this is a misquotation or he just misspoke, of releasing this movie, so I'm just starting to form clusters of ideas for the trilogy. I don't even understand how people could look at this and get the order of events wrong. Johnson is clearly saying he pitched this idea for a new trilogy to Kathleen Kennedy while working on The Last Jedi or leading up to its release, depending on where you want to draw that line, since this article is from December of 2017, and technically the film would have been finished in its production by then. Either way, if Star Wars Theory isn't just lying, then he's either spreading someone else's misinformation or misremembering. I'm sure I can't say which. Back to the topic at hand, now Star Wars Theory is not only saying Mark is being dishonest in not saying what he supposedly really thinks about The Last Jedi, which as we've seen was kind of always a sham cooked up with selective clipping to make some provocative remarks Mark Hamill made look like something more when it never was. But he's also saying Mark is somehow being dishonest about what Mark himself is testifying to seeing from the fandom. Did you hear a comment, Mark, from a fan saying you said something you didn't? No, you didn't hear that, because otherwise I wouldn't get to say you think this other thing you didn't say. I also like that Star Wars Theory makes it about fans being paying customers as well. Gotta wedge in a little bit more of that consumer identity, right? Gotta get your Karen on. Is he saying Mark Hamill sells his autograph for $1,000? If he autographs things for free, which I'm so absolutely certain I've seen him do in the past, you'd think it would be easier to wait in line and not pay the, $1,000, as opposed to waiting in line and paying $1,000. It really feels like Star Wars Theory is just making stuff up here. Alright guys, Editing Chariot back here again for a second interlude. I said earlier that there were 5 things instead of 3, and you might have been like, hey, wait a minute, I only count 4 with that other thing. Yeah, so actually, the autograph thing that Star Wars Theory is saying, that is a really weird thing to say, and I kept thinking as I was editing this video, what a weird remark to make. I can't believe he said that. That is such a strange thing to say. That's so odd. That's so weird. Okay, well, it turns out Mark Hamill's like extremely on the record about not liking the autograph business. So the idea that like Mark is shortchanging the fans who pay a ton for autographs, whereas, like, Mark just wants to sign things for fans. Just take a look at these clips and tell me if you think this is as funny as I think it is.
And I might as well inscribe them all best wishes to eBay.
Yeah, because they're already on eBay.
People were sending me screenshots of the items that I had signed hours earlier.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Already on
See,
eBay.
he used to always want to sign because he thought they would be fans. And I can usually, Chelsea and I have good meters. We can tell.
Well, she also takes pictures of people.
I do. I take photos because one time when we were at Sundance, he kept getting swarmed. So I was taking photos of everyone he signed for, and then they would appear later and be like, "Oh, that's not me. That's my twin brother." I'm like, "Oh, how convenient that you have a story." And everyone seems to have a twin. Okay.
How much money did they get from my autograph?
Well, you'd be surprised.
Well, they're waiting for you to die.
Well, that's a lovely thing to say. The value shoots right through the roof.
Memorabilia has become such a lucrative business. They're not fans. They're people that, you know, I'll sign something at Universal, and by the time we get home to Malibu, they're already on eBay. So I love the fans, but not so much the dealers. But you're trapped. What can I do? I mean, I'm thrilled tonight they're not here. The last time we did something for... it was just mobs of people with lightsabers and posters and all that. And like I say, I'm happy to do, you know what the real telling is, say, how about a selfie? No, I want you to sign my lightsaber. See, a real fan would say, yeah, let's do a selfie. So it's just something you have to live with. It's something that's been a part of my life for a long time now.
So yeah, I mean, just when you think Star Wars Theory can't fit any more misinformation into one really stupid and annoying and kind of mean-spirited video, he does it. He gets away with it. So there you go. That's thing 5. Back to the video. I have to say, it's so weird how Star Wars Theory simultaneously tries to make it sound like Mark Hamill is snubbing the fans while also taking a ton of their money. He also sneaks in there that nobody cares about Rian Johnson, according to him. As I think we've seen, as far as anti-fan negativity, I'm not so sure that's the case. There's definitely at least a couple people out there who are as deluded as Mark Hamill is describing, which is really sad. It takes this thing that is about hope and vision, about life and people and struggle, and makes it petty and silly. And somehow Star Wars Theory has managed to take that and turn it around on Mark, as if any of this is Mark's fault, seemingly purely because Mark Hamill is not sticking to Star Wars Theory's preferred narrative. What a piece of work this guy is. Let's look at an uninterrupted clip from the actual interview.
In The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker has sort of exiled himself. And from what I understand, that was uncomfortable for you when you read it.
Well, here's the thing, and I'd love to clear this up. Rian Johnson is one of the most gifted directors I've ever worked with. He's amiable, he's fun on set, he's smart. He made a great movie. I think the staging of the standoff between Kylo Ren, Adam Driver, and I at the end is so well staged. You know, the foreshadowing that I'm not really there. Adam wipes the snow away and you see the red planet beneath. I wipe the snow and it's just snow. I mean, that's so subtle. I love Knives Out and Brick and Looper. He's one of my favorite directors. And the fact that I went public with my dissatisfaction with the motivation for Luke becoming a suicidal hermit might have colored things in a way that maybe I should have kept that to myself. But I kept saying to Rian, this would just make Luke double down even. He said, well, your whole, your class at the Jedi Academy were wiped out.
And he turned on me. He must have thought I was dead. When I came to, the temple was burning. He had vanished with a handful of my students and slaughtered the rest. Leia blamed Snoke, but it was me. I failed. because I was Luke Skywalker, Jedi Master. I said, Rian, I saw entire planets wiped out. If anything, Luke doubles down and it hardens his resolve in the face of adversity. So that's all. I said, can I make up my own backstory of why he is the way he is? I don't want to just say that, I have bumped my head and I have brain damage. He said, yeah, do whatever you want. So I made up a much, much darker backstory that I thought could justify him being that way.
I'll leave it there, and you can check the description for the excellent full interview. But I think this kind of seems like it affirms everything I've been saying here. Two things can be true. Mark Hamill can approve of the film and also want to draw his motivation as an actor from another place. Looking at the comment section for this video is really something. Despite everything you might say, Star Wars Theory clearly instigated a pile-on here, and it's plain for all to see. His fans are even referencing him directly, talking about how the gentleman hosting the interview wouldn't dare to debate Star Wars Theory about The Last Jedi. It's such a funny concept. YouTube commenters really are a different breed. Do you think these people are literally children? Or are they just so socially maladjusted that they actually think acting like this is normal? Did they not check which channel they're commenting on? Bullseye is an NPR podcast, among other things. Challenging the host to a debate sounds like some kind of stupid joke. We need to put this all back into perspective before wrapping up. Remember what I said earlier about how guys like Star Wars Theory like to posture as if Mark Hamill agrees with them? Well, about that.
But all the characters face challenges in the second act of a 3-act play or opera. I mean, this is where all the darkest things happen. I mean, there's triumphs, of course, but more than its share of tragedies.
Right. Well, you spoke about dark and somber. Question about that is, was there anything personally that you drew from or any other characters that you may have portrayed that gave this version of Luke more nuance?
Well, I had to find what could have happened that would make the most hopeful, optimistic character wind up in this dark place. Now, I was 11 when the Beatles hit,
right,
and they were the peace and love generation, and when I was in high school, I said, I believed all that. I thought, by the time we get in power, there'll be no more wars, we'll end world famine, hey, baby,
right,
love is all you need. And that, we failed. Basically, we failed. So even though this is a fantasy, you try and find something that you can relate to in life to be able to portray that element of the screenplay.
Right.
And so that's what I was thinking of, is the potential of the flower power generation. And now the world is worse than it's ever been. You thought Watergate was bad? That was just two parties. Now it's a political entity with a hostile foreign government. And that we've been in perpetual war. I thought, well, at least after Vietnam, we'll never get into another pointless war that will, with no clear objective. We've been in perpetual war for what, 17, 18 years now?
I can't imagine what it must be like to have such a strong element of your persona built up around something, around a property or work of art, or series of works of art, and then to grow up into the exact kind of person that the creator and key people making that art would say is not making the world a better place, but rather a worse one. That's the kind of person Star Wars Theory is, if you're familiar with his other collaborations on this platform and his public remarks. And while it's not the kind of person you necessarily have to be to criticize the Disney Star Wars films, or even to dislike them, it certainly seems like that has contributed to that public discourse significantly. I think that's a shame. I think Mark Hamill playing Luke Skywalker is a remarkable case of either serendipity or good casting by George Lucas, because Lucas has those kind of anti-imperialist, left-wing values that Mark Hamill is alluding to here. And Hamill is clearly looking back with his years of experience and seeing how history has unfolded, and all the ways things have not gotten better, the ways previous generations have failed. I think it's neat that someone like George would have cast someone like Mark as arguably the main protagonist in his first trilogy in the series. Star Wars has a political context, and we're going to talk about that the next time we dive into this series here on this channel. But I think what Mark Hamill is getting at, this idea of the legacy of failure, is a real theme for Star Wars. It was retroactively a theme that the prequels applied to the original trilogy. And although this may or may not have been the explicit intent of creatives like Abrams and Johnson, who seem to have been less friendly towards the prequels, I still think their trilogy ironically replicated that same sensation, of new generations encountering the failings of older generations, and seeing the march of history and all its injustices. I can't imagine being someone who admires George Lucas and Mark Hamill, and then going out and ever supporting or even turning a blind eye to the kind of movements that are a part of those injustices. You want to talk about disrespect? That all seems pretty darn disrespectful. But that's a subject for another time. Thank you all for watching, everybody. Subscribe to the channel, support me on Patreon, like the video and comment with your thoughts, and be sure to take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next one.